everyone, it's Laurie-Anne King here with Laurie-Anne King Coaching, and today we're going to be talking about mastering male-female communication. So before we get into it, a little bit about who I am. I'm a dating and relationship coach. I have been studying motivation and human psychology and what it takes to really have amazing relationships for the last 5 years. And I've studied with some of the industry's best, including Layla Martin, an expert in women's sexuality. You may have come across on the Huffington Post or CBS. I've also studied and even been on stage with Tony Robbins, a leader in the personal development industry. I'm the author of the forthcoming book, 7 Steps to Epic Love, How to Have Relationships That Not Only Last, But Grow Over Time. And I'm the founder of the San Francisco Sisterhood, a sacred community for women. I now live with my husband in California. So here's my promise for today. We're going to be together for about an hour, and in this hour, you're going to learn about yourself and your gender. You're also going to gain insights into the inner workings of the opposite sex. And you'll leave with practical tips for improving your communication. So I want this to be an interesting conversation, and I also want it to be more than just interesting. I want it to really have an impact on your life. So the more you bring your life to this conversation, the more worthwhile your time is going to be. So let me tell you a little bit about why I started doing this work. This is a picture of myself and my now husband, Craig. And this picture was taken a few months after we met. We had one of those kind of whirlwind romances. I was too rational, too logical of a person at the time to have admitted that it was love at first sight. But I definitely remember the moment that I met Craig. We met on a ski trip in Park City while I was living in Toronto, Canada, and he was living in New York City. And I remember the first weekend I went to visit him in New York. Again, still too rational to admit that I'd found my soulmate. But I distinctly remember leaving that weekend with him, knowing that my life had changed. Because I didn't even know I could ask for someone like him. He just fit me so completely. So if you fast forward a year later, Craig and I are engaged. And this is where the story starts to take a bit of a dip. Because as much love as we had for one another, as much respect as we had for each other, and as much certainty as I had that he was the man for me, the passion in our relationship had started to fade. The energy in our relationship had started to fade. The intimacy in our relationship had started to fade. And I went through a couple different phases. At first I would tell myself it wasn't that bad, and maybe this is just what married life is supposed to be like, and I should get used to it. But deep down, there was really this part of me that was hurting, that wasn't being satisfied, that wasn't even being acknowledged by myself. And so finally, I set out on a quest. I said, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to get married and promise my life to someone, I'm going to know what I'm really doing. And I was just totally obsessed with researching relationships. And one of the first things I learned is that somewhere between 10 to 17% of people report being in a happy marriage. 10 to 17%. Those are not good odds. I don't even play roulette, and you've got better odds throwing your money on red or black. So I really dug into, well, what are these 10 to 17% of people doing differently that lets them say they're in a happy marriage? And what I found in my research, so much of it was not talked about in our mainstream culture. It wasn't common knowledge that it took over my life, and I left my work in corporate America, and I've dedicated myself full-time to educating, coaching, and sharing with people about how they can have amazing relationships. And this is a picture of Craig and I at our wedding last July, and he's the best part of my life. There's no doubt, and I'm so grateful for my partnership with him. And one of the things I love the most about our relationship is how committed we are to growing together. It's like one fight isn't the end of the world, because we can always learn from it. We can always learn to be better for ourselves and for one another. So I want to say to you, you are awesome for being here. I really mean that. It's really easy when things don't work the way we want them to. It's so easy to point the finger at someone else and say, oh, it's their fault. It's because they didn't, or they did, they shouldn't have. But masters, people with a growth mindset, they look at themselves. They look at, what can I be responsible for? What could I improve upon? What action could I take to make a difference here? And I just really acknowledge you for being on this call. Most people wouldn't participate in a class about mastering communication. I figure I've been communicating my whole life. I'm pretty good at it. But there's always room to grow. And so I'm really honored to be here and to be leading for people who have this growth mindset, who are interested in having life as good as they can have it. So why are you here? This is a part of bringing your life to this conversation. Really take a look for yourself. What do you want to get out of today's conversation? Is there somewhere that you're struggling with the opposite sex? How would having better communication with the opposite sex change your life? If you have a piece of paper with you or a word processor open, just take a few seconds and just note, what's going to make this hour really worthwhile for you? Okay, and before we get into the meat of the conversation, I want to do a big warning here. I'm going to be making broad, sweeping generalizations in this conversation. Okay, it's a class about male-female communication. So I'm inevitably going to lump men into one category and women into another category. And I know not all men are the same and not all women are the same. But this class is meant to empower you and improve your communication by creating distinctions, by being able to detect differences that exist. And so in no way is this meant to limit your self-expression. And I really encourage you, take what feels helpful. And anything that doesn't feel helpful, leave that behind. Use this in a way that's going to empower and improve your life and your communication. Okay, so before we get into the 3 secrets of mastering male-female communication, I had to kind of scratch my head for a second. Because I did some market research, and this was one of the topics people were asking for. I had to stop and think, well, why do we even need a class like this? Humans have been around for 200,000 years. For as long as there have been women, there have been men. We've had a lot of time to get to know each other. And we've had language for at least 50,000 of those years. So why do men and women still struggle to communicate with each other sometimes? Well, for most of human history, men actually spent majority of their time with other men, and women spent majority of their time with other women. And long-term relationships, marriage, the nuclear family as we view it today, is actually relatively new. It's really only been around for about 200 to 300 years. So a lot of our ingrained patterns of communication, a lot of the way our brains developed, our attention habits have developed, are actually based in the way we spent most of our life as humans, which was in more tribal societies. And we actually are not that skilled or practiced at living in daily communication with the opposite sex and in daily partnership with the opposite sex. So this brings us to secret number one. The first secret is to understand why men and women communicate. And what we'll look at is actually primarily men communicate for a different reason than what women communicate for. To understand this, we're going to take a little trip back through time and really look at what was going on for much of our tribal years, which is majority of our evolution as humans, right? Like 190,000 of our 200,000 years on the planet. So let's look at the role of men in the tribal community. The role of a man in the tribe was to be a provider and a protector, right? So how a man knew that he was valuable to his tribe is if he could hunt and he could protect. And most of his time would be spent hunting. So this could include long periods of silence and a lot of isolation. Now, he might also be hunting in a group or going to defend or attack in a group. And when this would happen, the men would be bonded over the shared challenge. So they were really bonded over the mission that they were on. And the times that men were most likely to be social for just the sake of being social would happen more in the evenings, around the campfire, after the work of the day was done. But you might also actually find a lot of quiet around this campfire and just watching the fire, maybe reviewing what happened that day and what could be better the next day, or the alpha male of the group telling a great story. This is what kind of daily life would have looked like in tribal communities for men. And what this tells us about a man's reason for communicating is that men communicate primarily in order to solve a problem. It's their main reason of communication, to meet a challenge or solve a problem, to fix something. So let's look at the role of women. Well, while the men would leave to hunt or protect or go to another tribe, the women would be left with the less mobile members of the tribe, so the children and the elderly. And the women and the less mobile members of the tribe would essentially form a tribe of their own. And they would have long stretches of time where the men were gone and the women were left on this smaller tribe of their own. They were also responsible for the survival of very young pre-verbal children. So the children from 0 to the time that they could eat solid foods and walk on their own 2 feet, let's say 18 months, would be the sole responsibility of the women, and even after. But in particular importance is the pre-verbal phase. And another part of the woman's role in the tribe was she did a lot of mundane activities, like picking berries, as an example, or fetching firewood, or fetching water. A lot of mundane activities that didn't require full focus. The same way when you're hunting, you need to be silent, so you can hear the rustling of the bushes or the signs of prey. So what we can learn about this is actually women connected and communicated both as a way of passing time and as a way of ensuring their safety. So when this smaller tribe of the women and the less mobile members were left alone to fend for themselves while the men would leave to hunt, part of how you knew you were safe as a woman is that you knew you were connected to the tribe. So women communicate primarily in order to feel connection, to feel and create connection. So what can we learn from this? Well, we see that men spent little time around pre-verbal children, and women were responsible for children surviving through the pre-verbal phases. One result of this has been that women have an increased capacity to detect emotional cues and vocal tonality. As women, we had to learn to distinguish the difference between a baby crying because it was hungry and a baby crying because it was very sick. So an example of this in our modern society is perhaps as a woman you've said, or you as a man have heard a woman say, well, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. Okay, women actually have an advanced capacity to detect differences in vocal tone. And the man in the story might literally not know what the woman is pointing to. So it hasn't developed the same capacity to detect that emotional tonality. Another insight is that men knew they were safe in their tribe if they could produce results. So if they had a very successful hunt, for example. Women knew they were safe in their tribe if they could create emotional connection. So women are frequently testing their safety through communication. That's why women call just to check in. Right? How many men do you know that call their buddies just to check in? It's a lot less common, right? But women were saying, oh, I'm just checking in, I'm just touching base, just wanted to see how you're doing. We're looking for that feeling of safety and certainty through the connection we feel through our communication. Another insight is that men spent much more time on their own, either in silence while hunting. And women, we communicated with each other all day, every day, as one of the ways of passing time. So when it comes to it comes to the last 50,000 years of having language and communicating all day, every day, well, men spent a lot of their time in silence. Women have a lot more practice at communication under their belt. So women generally have more advanced communication skills. And our brains actually have evolved differently over time. So one of the more obvious ways this is shown up in the brain is women have a thicker corpus callosum. This is the part of the brain that connects the left and right hemisphere. So what that means is we're able to both logically and emotionally process things much faster, simultaneously much faster. We're also better at multitasking. Another way that this evolved is that emotions actually impact men and women differently in our physiology. So if you were to put a man and a woman into a similar emotional state of similar intensity, let's say you make them both really angry, and then you were to monitor their physiology, you would find that cues in the man's physiology stay active much longer. His heart rate will stay higher much longer. His levels of cortisol will be elevated much longer. It actually takes longer for emotions to process and clear in the body than it does for women. So women, when I say that they generally have more advanced communication skills, what I really mean is they have more facility with feeling with processing emotions quickly, and with actually communicating those emotions. So this is coupled with now living in a society where it's much more socially acceptable for women to be in touch with their emotions and to express their emotions. So they have more practice in this lifetime, as well as a brain structure that's more set up for this style of communication. And why I'm really stressing this point here is because actually most men that I've had this conversation with, they agree. It's like, yeah, I would agree. When you're talking about having better communication skills in terms of ability to process and communicate emotions and speed of processing, like women can talk a mile a minute as an example, most men agree. But why this is a really important point for women to get in particular is that we don't usually realize this. And when we go and try and have an emotional conversation with a man, we don't realize that it's like the equivalent of us being an Olympic level swimmer and the man being a novice level swimmer in terms of having emotionally charged, honest conversations. So we get into the pool and we're sprinting and swimming as fast as we can, and we look back and the novice is still at the starting line. So we really actually want to have space and empathy and realize that we're asking a man, when we ask him to have a really emotionally charged conversation with him, we're asking him to do something that's not very comfortable, that's going to affect his physiology for longer than it's going to affect us, and something that he probably feels like he doesn't have a lot of facility with. And a lot of men have told me that when they get into these kinds of conversations with women, they actually feel like they're at a disadvantage. Like the woman is able to process so much more quickly than him. And for women, it's a lot easier for our thoughts to come out of our mouths as words. It happens much more quickly. Men generally really consider their thoughts and then form them into words after. For women, we're able to do it simultaneously, and in fact, we often process through our words. So maybe you've noticed as a woman that sometimes you didn't even realize you were feeling a certain way until you heard yourself say it out loud. That's an example of processing actually through our communication. So I think I've stressed that point enough. It's really just a point where part of why we're having this conversation is so we can be responsible for the level of skill we have in having these difficult conversations and actually learn to have them in a way that makes it more of a quote-unquote fair fight, so that both people can really express what's important to them and we can reach great solutions. Okay, so what are some ways this shows up today? Well, where we see that men primarily communicate in order to solve a problem, whereas women communicate primarily to create connection, we see this one way in that men generally prefer to have technical conversations. Okay, this I see very clearly with my father. The man could talk about the ins and outs and the details of golf and how to perfect the golf swing literally forever. Whereas I see my mother, she prefers to talk about things that actually create emotions. She wants to talk about the latest drama that's happening in her office place, or who said what to who, and that relationship. And you'll find generally women's conversations take you on more of a emotional arc than men's conversations. We'll also notice that men want the conversation to come to resolution. Like they're looking for the conversation to get somewhere or end or be completed. And women see no need for conversation to go anywhere. They're communicating for connection. You also might see in the conversation that a man is trying to solve the woman's problem, whereas the woman actually doesn't realize she's communicating any problems. She's just sharing for connection, but what he's hearing are problems that need to be solved. And sometimes men just want peace and quiet. This makes a lot of sense when you think about how emotions stay with men for longer. It takes more effort and energy for them to communicate really rapidly and frequently, and how much time they spent in silence for most of human history. Whereas women tend to want more communication than men do. So secret number one is really laying the foundation. We understand now why men communicate, primarily to solve a problem, and why women communicate, primarily to connect. So now we're going to see how this colors our listening. And listening is, in my opinion, the more important part of communication. Generally speaking, tends to get all of the attention, but listening is a really important and active part of the conversation. And we're going to look at the default ways we listen and how we can listen to the opposite sex better. So for men, the default mode of listening is, how can I fix this? Something needs to be solved. What can I do about it? The default mode of listening for women is, I agree with that, or I disagree with that. So you might hear, oh, that's so right. True, true. Yeah, I would have done the exact same thing. Or you might hear, I'm not sure about that. Well, do you really want to? I don't think you should do that. Okay, and women are listening for, I agree and I disagree. And again, I agree creates a lot of harmony, a lot of connection for women. And I disagree can create some flags. So phrases you might have heard between men and women. This first one, I hear that from my husband a lot. He'll say, okay, get to the point. He doesn't want to hear all the details and the ins and outs. And I might say to him, you're not listening to me. You might hear a man again trying to solve the problem. Well, why don't you just blank? And really, for a man, it's so simple. It's so glaringly obvious what the solution is. And it can be really frustrating for men to be in a conversation where they're listening from, how can I fix this? To find a solution and then try to offer it and have that solution not be received. And the solution's not received because a woman isn't in solution mode. She's in sharing mode, right? She has no interest in a solution to her problem right now. And actually, women really process a lot of their emotions and their problems through the communication. So actually, just communicating and being heard is often enough to lead her to her own solution or to reduce the charge around the subject. So you might hear her saying, I feel like you just don't get it, or you're not listening to me. You might hear a man ask something like, are you still talking about the same thing? Because women, we tend to bounce around in conversation, right? We're very dynamic, and we might see connections in what we're sharing easily. Whereas men who tend to be more single-focused and more linear might not see the same connection, and it'll occur like what you're sharing is really random. Like, why are you talking about that all of a sudden? I thought we were talking about tennis. Another reason this comes up for men is because they're listening from, how can I fix this? So when a woman starts sharing something that to a man sounds like a problem, he starts engaging in his mind with, well, what's the solution to this? And then the woman has changed topics because she's really just sharing. And the man still now, he's trying to figure out how this new topic relates to the problem. And he's really engaged in trying to figure it out. And then maybe a little while it'll strike him that like, this might not be related to the problem at all. So now he's locked in on the new problem that she's talking about. And by the time he gets locked in on the new problem, she's on a different subject altogether. And another thing you might hear from women is, oh, he never says much, or can't get 2 words out of him. This often has more to do with how we listen as women than it really does with how much men have to communicate. So some listening tips for men. Men, I want you to try listening to women the same way you watch a movie about a superhero. So you're going to give them your attention, but don't try to solve anything. All you want to do is figure out who in the story is the hero, who in the story is the villain, and then cheer for the hero and boo the villain. And this is going to provide the space for the woman to process what she needs to process. It's going to create a lot of connection for her as you're agreeing with her about who the hero of the story is and who the villain of the story is. And she's going to feel really heard and supported. And if you get confused in the conversation, like maybe she's jumped around on different topics quickly, you can actually just ask, is this related to that, or is this something new? And this last point, marvel at the weather. So what I mean by marvel at the weather is perhaps you've noticed that women have this enormous capacity to go through many emotional states quickly, right? All in the span of 1 minute, we can be laughing, crying, and yelling, like that fast. So as a man, if you listen to a woman's change in emotional state, or even if you look at and feel and listen to her emotions like they're a problem to solve, you are setting yourself up for a very difficult life. Okay, the woman's emotions are not your problem to solve. They're just what's happening as she processes whatever it is that she's sharing about, or whatever it is that's going on in her life in that moment, or whatever it is you did or said. So rather than looking at her emotions as something to solve, I want you to watch and observe them as if they were the weather. It's not personal. The weather is changing right now. So marvel at the rain and watch it become a hurricane, and then see the beautiful, calm, sunny day, and just really marvel and observe. Still give her that attention, give her that space to experience what she needs to experience. Okay, some listening tips for women. So women, I want you to try listening to men, not from, do I agree or disagree with what they're saying, but actually listen from, what can I learn about them? See, men tend to communicate their values through their opinions and their stories. They're communicating their values, the fabric of who they are. So they don't actually care whether you agree with their values or not. That's who they are. It's not about whether you agree or disagree with who they are. And we want to be really careful about interruption. Interruption really derails a man's communication. And what's really common is that women will actually interrupt in order to agree. And this is fine with your other female friends you're communicating with, right? Women, if you listen to a conversation between two women, it's essentially a series of interruptions, often sounding like agreement, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that. Oh, when that happened to me, I felt so awful too. Yes, oh my gosh, yes. You know, it's a series of just letting you know I'm still with you. Just letting you know I think you're great. Just letting you know I'm still here in the conversation. That's one of the ways we create that connection, through providing a lot of agreement. If you interrupt a man to let him know that you agree with what he's saying or sharing, it's first going to really derail him. And secondly, you might get an answer like, of course you agree, I'm right. Right? He's not communicating it in order to get agreement, which is what a lot of women do. He's communicating it because that's his values. That's who he is. So the second piece to not interrupting is also not interrupting them once we've asked a question. So here's a common communication pattern between women and men. A woman will ask a man a question. The man will thoughtfully be considering the question, trying to come up with the best answer he can to the question. This will usually take a man longer than it would take a woman. So the woman will assume that he didn't understand the question. And this will happen really fast, like not even consciously necessarily. But she'll automatically rephrase the question so that he can understand it and answer it. The man who was locked in, remember, they developed largely as hunters, right? So he was locked in on the first target, answer this question. Now he's given a totally new target, has to change his focus. So now he's locked in on the second question, and he's thoughtfully considering that question, trying to give the woman the best answer he can. While he's doing that, the woman assumes he still doesn't understand the question, and she rephrases it a third time. Now the man has to change his focus again. He gets locked in. He's considering that question. The woman, who still hasn't heard an answer, now gets really frustrated at this point and makes the question as simple as possible to answer by giving him a multiple choice question. Okay, look, do you want A, B, or C? It's a really common communication pattern between men and women. Maybe it doesn't always get to the multiple choice question, but just start to notice, women, how often are you rephrasing your question to the men in your life? And men, you can start to be aware of this pattern as well. And actually, if a woman does that to you, you can say, hold on, I'm still thinking about that. Women, what I want you to try is what Alison Armstrong refers to as going to the well. Okay, so you're going to wait as long as 30 seconds after you ask a question. And it's going to feel like a really long time for you. But you're actually giving him the time to thoughtfully consider, process, and then share. And then once he gives his answer, I want you to wait another 30 seconds. And more often than not, what will actually happen is he'll start talking again, and he'll actually add more to his answer. And then you can wait another 30 seconds. And this might continue to go on, where he'll share a bit, have more time to consider, more space will open up after he shares, then he'll share a bit more, and this might repeat itself 3, 4, even 5 times. And what's really amazing is if you give him in that much space and time to really respond to you, he'll empty out the whole well. He'll say everything there is for him to say about that. And then when he's done, he'll actually say, I'm done. Or, I don't think I have any more to say about that. So I really invite you to practice these skills of both listening to men to learn about them, as well as not interrupting and really giving them that space to wait for their answer and to let them decide when they're done answering. So I want you to stop and just reflect for a moment. What's one thing you've already learned in today's webinar that you can really bring to your life, that you can really apply? You stop and jot that down for yourself. Okay, great. And now it is time for a surprise special gift before we get to secret number 3. So I'm really grateful that you joined today's webinar, and today you've already learned the first 2 secrets in mastering male-female communication. We've looked at why men and women communicate and how we communicate differently and what kind of friction that can cause in relationships. And we've also looked at what are some practical ways we can change how we're listening to improve our communication. But challenge is that many of you are going to need ongoing support to help you implement these and other tools and resources, to break old patterns you might have in relationships. Some of you, these are patterns that you've had for years. And without mentorship, it can be really hard to break through and create a new pattern. So for those of you who are really committed to having amazing relationships, I wanted to do something special for you. So here's the deal. Normally, my one-on-one coaching time is $197 an hour. But since you're here today, and this is the first week I've ever done these webinars, I really wanted to do something special for you. Now, this isn't for everybody. It's specifically for those of you who have been struggling to get what you want in relationships and are really committed to having the relationship you want in your life now. I'm going to gift you with my one-on-one relationship breakthrough session. Complimentary for you, totally free. Now, this is an hour-long phone call with me, and in this session, we're going to take a look at where you are now, what your specific goals are, and what might be stopping you from having what you ultimately want. And I'll give you some resources to help you right away. So my time is limited, and unfortunately, I won't be able to have a one-on-one session with every single person who attends this webinar or watches the replay. So I only have 5 of them available, and they're going to go to the first 5 people who send an email to admin@laurieanneking.com with the subject line, claim my session. Okay, and these sessions are first come, first serve. So if you want to claim one, send a really quick email to this address. You don't even need to put anything in the body of the email, but just put the subject line, and then you'll get an email from my assistant about how to book your session. Okay, so I'll just give you 30 seconds to do that right now, and then we'll move on to secret number 3 of mastering male-female communication. Okay, awesome. So secret number 3 is called frame your conversation. So one of the first things construction workers do when they build a house is they put up the framing. This is the structure of the house. Okay, this lets everyone know what they're building and what shape it's going to take. Framing a conversation is important for a couple of reasons. First reason it's important is we never know what state someone is in when we enter a conversation with them. You know, it's a very human tendency to assume that someone else is having the same experience we're having, just in a particular moment, right? I'm coming from a particular state. My natural underlying assumption, without giving it any conscious thought, is that someone else is in the same state. We live really busy lives, and it's very possible that someone you want to enter a conversation with doesn't have any room to give you attention at that moment, or just came from something really horrible and they're dealing with that. You know, an example of this in my life is I work from home. So my home office is square in the middle of my apartment. And when my husband gets home from work, he might be excited to share about a huge case they won that day. And meanwhile, I'm still in work mode. I don't have any attention to give him in the moment. And he's coming in this excited state, and he's excited about being matched and seen in that excited state. And he could end up feeling really rejected because I don't give him the attention he was expecting to get. Okay? Framing is really important, so we allow people to consciously enter into conversation with us. Another reason it's particularly important for entering into conversation with men is that men and women have different attention patterns that have developed over time. And this is, again, really based on how we spend our time in tribal communities. So the most common attention pattern for men is a single focused awareness. They are the hunters, right? It's this picture of this cougar who's got its eyes locked in on its target, and it is going for that target. They are mission-driven creatures. So for men, generally what gets the attention is the most pressing need at the time. And it's difficult to sway them off target once they're locked in on a mission. Now, the more common attention pattern for women is what they call diffuse awareness. So if you think back to those tribal days, right? Men were out hunting. They were the predators in the ecosystem. While the women and the less mobile members of their tribe were left actually as prey in the ecosystem. So similar to how a rabbit has eyes on the side of its head so it can see its surroundings, it has these large ears that move in all these directions so it can hear any danger. Women's awareness developed really similarly to that, where we have this awareness that's not just straight out in front of us, but actually all around us. It's part of why we can simultaneously be in a heated debate and very aware of the fact that there's a dirty sock on the floor. We can hold all of that in our awareness at once. So here are some tips for men on framing. Honey, I'm excited to hear what you have to say, but I'm tired and I'm having trouble focusing right now. I think if I had a half an hour to unwind first, then I would be able to give you my full attention. Can we talk in a half an hour? Okay, this is a great one to use. A really common time I see my male clients using it is they've just come home from work, for example, and their partner is really excited to share with them, and they don't have any space for it yet. You know, they're like full from their day at work. They just kind of need to unload first. That's really common feeling for men, to feel like they're full already. They can't take any more. So in framing it like this, you know, really what you're doing is you're acknowledging the woman. Hey, I'm excited to hear what you have to say. This is code for saying, you're important to me. You're safe with me, just so you know. You know, then you're actually acknowledging what you need, where you are right now. I'm tired and I'm having trouble focusing right now. And now you're offering a solution. I think if I had half an hour to unwind first, then I would be able to give you my full attention. So now you're telling her what's in it for her, because I guarantee you, your full attention is almost always the only thing she wants. And then you're actually asking, can we talk in half an hour? So now you're getting her agreement or her disagreement, but you're giving her a voice in the conversation. Another one, this is great to use when you want to share something that's difficult for you to say, and you're worried about not getting it all out or being pushed off track. I want to tell you something that is difficult for me to say. Would you be willing to listen and not say anything until I'm done? You can actually request that space to express yourself completely first. This one's great to use when you're listening and you get confused on what role you should be playing in the conversation. Would you like me to try to help you to solve this, or are you looking for me to just listen and support you? Okay, you can actually ask that when you get confused in the conversation. And some tips for women. First one is now a good time to talk? Okay, this is a really great one because men have that single focus awareness. You don't know what mission they're already locked into. And I cannot count the number of times I've started a conversation with my husband when it hasn't been a good time to talk. And then I've ended up feeling unimportant or kind of rejected. But really all that was happening is he was already on another mission. So now what I'll ask a lot of the time is, when can I have your undivided attention? So now I'm making it explicitly clear what it is that I want from him, and I'm actually letting him solve the problem of when he can give that to me. You can also frame the conversation up front to create the space for you to just share as a woman without needing to defend some suggestions or advice, right? You can say, I had a hard day and I would love to share it with you. I don't need you to try to fix anything. I'm pretty sure that just saying it out loud will make me feel better. Could you listen? And finally, you're not in trouble, but I would like to talk about how we can avoid blank next time. Okay, this one is really important. When you want to have a problem-solving kind of conversation, or you want to review something that didn't work so well between the two of you and come to a new solution, one thing that really helps women, what will really help you call forth the best part of your man in that conversation is to make it really clear that he's not in trouble. So when we think about a man's socialization process, majority of the time, their primary authority figure when they're very young was their mother. And most elementary school teachers, actually, especially in the younger ages, are also female. So men learn to love, respect, be attracted to, and fear women all at the same time. So a woman is coming across, when a man doesn't know if he's in trouble or not, will actually kind of call forth this inner boy part of him, this inner boy who's trying not to be in trouble. So when you make it explicitly clear, okay, you're not in trouble, I just want to talk about this, then he's actually able to bring the best part of him to that conversation and doesn't have to worry about being defensive or protecting himself. Okay, those are all of the 3 secrets we've had. We've talked about why men and women communicate, men to solve problems, women to create connection. We've talked about how the best ways to listen to the opposite sex are, and we've talked about the importance of framing your conversations. I really hope this was a valuable use of your hour, and if you enjoyed today, would you be so kind as to tell me? Send an email to admin@laurieanneking.com. Tell me what you liked about the webinar. If there's anything you think could be improved or anything you didn't like, you can tell me that as well. And I have a growth mindset, so I'm always looking for feedback. And thank you so much for sharing and joining How to Master Male-Female Communication.